All right. And I guess for both of us, the lighting will get a little bit better as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, I could turn the lights on, but that, creates a kind of strange light, and the sun will start. It's dawn is occurring right now, so it'll light up in the background shortly.
Agreed. I can see the
Until
light.
then, my head will just float like some kind of creature from another realm.
I love it. So I'd love to start with just a discussion about typology. Uh,
Sure.
I feel like it's not something that a lot of people understand or know about. And I think it's incredibly important because there's obviously plenty of evidence for it going on, uh, even today. And
Yeah.
so I think understanding that it was something that happened in the past and why it was happening is an important foundation for understanding how it could be happening still today and why it might still be happening today. Um, what I'm actually interested in hearing about, I've looked at your documentary quite a few times, and I've done a little bit of other research about the story of Jesus, but I don't know a lot about your Shakespeare research.
Mm.
I haven't been able to find a lot online, and I just recently learned about it. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you discovered the typology in Shakespeare and what led you to that.
Sure. Well, someone simply asked me to do a review of Titus Andronicus, the Shakespearean play.
Mm.
They were curious, having read Caesar's Messiah, um, about anything with the name Titus in it, because I show in Caesar's Messiah that Titus Flavius, the Roman Caesar who basically fulfilled the prophecies of the character Jesus Christ, is the Son of Man that is identified through typology in the Gospels. So Caesar's Messiah is kind of a long explanation of the typology in the Gospels. And so the name Titus then was um, in this individual's mind. And when he read Titus Andronicus, he said that, it just seemed odd to him. That there were some themes that may have been related to it. I'd never read the play or I had any interest in Shakespeare. But I reviewed the play, and I could see almost immediately that the author of the play was aware of the typology in the Gospels, the typologic system that I had, asserted in Caesar's Messiah. Um, and I kind of read the play really quickly, and then, came to the end where there was a cannibal feast in which the character Titus Andronicus has the Gentile nobility unwittingly eating human flesh. And this struck me as a reversing of the typology in the Gospels, where the basically the Jewish nobility, the Maccabean family, are lampooned in the Last Supper as eating human flesh without knowing it. So this just seemed too tight of a parallel, and it was too obviously a reversing of it. And I noticed that, first of all, that the name of the character, the name of the play, Titus Andronicus, did seem to be related to Titus Flavius, because Andronicus is the name of another individual who sacked the Temple of Jerusalem. I mean, the temple, I think, was sacked 3 times, and two were one with Titus Flavius, and the other was this guy Andronicus, who captured Jerusalem and then was recorded in, I think, Maccabees, 2 Maccabees, as having taken things out of the temple, valuable things out of the temple. So I thought, well, this is strange. This seems to be relating to this character as someone who typologically has sacked the Temple of Jerusalem. So this is a direct link to the Gospels typology. Um, and then I actually noticed the sort of extremely clarifying point in the play. Um, there's a passage in which the character Titus Andronicus is asked about the behavior of his brother, and the behavior of the brother is he's all by himself in a room and he's catching flies, and they had this strange digression of dialogue where Titus Andronicus mentions another of times that it doesn't really become his brother to sit there and just catch flies. And I knew what immediately that now I was looking at a send up, a comic reversing of the Gospels typology concerning the Flavian family, because Titus's brother was famous for catching flies, being alone in a room and catching flies. Suetonius, the Roman historian, had recorded this. So I could see that this was a reversing of the typology in the Gospels. In this version of typology, the Flavian family was being mocked and ridiculed, as opposed to the Maccabean family, who was mocked and ridiculed in the Gospels. So it was on a Thursday, I think, and I spent that next weekend. I read the Shakespearean plays, and I could, I didn't precisely decode all of them, but I could see there was just all of the plays had been written from this perspective. Everyone had been written from the perspective of this reversing of the Flavian typology in the Gospels. And there was a lot of really like amusing sort of discoveries, things that had perplexed scholars that were just absolutely transparent to me. Like the example would be Macbeth. At the beginning of the play, you have the declaration concerning Macbeth that noble Macbeth, well does he deserve his name, right? He deserves his name. And then he describes how Macbeth seamed and unseamed his opponents on the battlefield, like he cut him apart and then, just sewed them back together. He was so dominant. And I knew I could, by reading it, that this was a pun, because Macbeth means seamster in Hebrew. And so this is a pun on that word, because the next lines go into seaming and unseaming. And so when you started to realize that the plays were written from a Jewish perspective, from a Jewish author, then all of this, the comic kind of aspect of it becomes vivid. Lady Macbeth has a spot on her hands, and she can't get rid of them. Well, she washes her hands over and over again. Well, you see, this is like mocking the Pontius Pilate washing of his hands after, in regards to the crucifixion of the Messiah. So the plays were, which, frankly, to me were very boring, became more interesting when you understand that there's this subtle humor. Romeo and Juliet, is all timed with the Feast of Lamistad, which is a Christian feast that was popular in the Middle Ages that had to do with the consecration of the harvest and the first bread that was made out of the first bread. And of course, and then the play has just this, like, whereas Macbeth had a whole genre of puns concerning seaming and seamster and sewing things that hadn't really been understood. In Romeo and Juliet, you had this whole business of Amistad and the unconsecrated bread, and this strange hourly storyline in the play. Again, no one really could understand this. But when you recognize that this was reversing the gospel story, you could see that Lamistad was just being, replacing the Passover in the Jewish circumstance with the consecration of the food, and then the hours, the 42 hours, and all the different timing is all related to or typologically, kind of mocking the Gospels organization of time in relationship to particularly the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. And so, once you understood that the plays were both a Jewish mockery and were linking to the Flavian typology in the Gospels, then what had been mysterious just becomes self-evident, and the plays make perfect sense. So I started my career as a Shakespearean scholar on a Thursday and finished it Sunday. I just really wasn't that interested in it, and I did eventually produce a book, Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, which includes my analysis of the character Paul. So there's two parts to the book, but I gave some of the plays as examples, and a number of scholars have picked up on my work and are starting to produce, legitimate, and by legitimate I mean coherent Shakespearean, critique. And I mean, even the name Will Shakespeare is a pun. You see, this is just this entire punning system. Will Shakespeare is actually a declaration of kind of the martial resistance that the Jewish organization that produced Shakespeare had against the Christian culture they lived within, which forbid them from practicing Judaism. Another thing that people will find amusing is that the preface to the folio, where you have this character Will Shakespeare introduced, the preface is actually stolen, and this has been understood by scholars, though they didn't understand why it was done. It was all taken from the introduction of Pliny's Panegyric, which is a homage to Titus Flavius, and the author of Shakespeare simply takes this introduction and reverses it completely, but it uses the exact same elements, the bread and the peasants. You'll have to read the analysis, it's kind of lengthy, but it was known that that for some reason Shakespeare was using Pliny, but they don't have any understanding of what this was. And it's kind of interesting in that people will just organize literature to make it seem coherent so that they kind of have a sense of understanding of literature. But this doesn't mean they actually understand it at all. It just means they have this sense of understanding. I mean, no one had a clue about Shakespeare for some reason and yet it's quite understandable because they didn't understand the Flavian typology in the Gospels. So anyway, the Flavian typology is really, in the Gospels, is really important. I mean, as it goes through our culture, you'll get to see things like the concept Brave New World used by the oligarchs. You'll see what it really means, actually. In fact, if people are curious about the expression, I kept that analysis of the Tempest, where the expression originally comes from. I kept it separate, so it's online. You don't have to pay any money. You can just Google my name and the Tempest, and it'll come up, and you can see how grim the future for the Gentiles is that this group is envisioning. And the Tempest is a cartoon of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. The elements of the play come from the book of Isaiah. Again, it was known to scholars, but didn't really understand where it was going. But in the analysis I show that scholarship had simply missed, because the links are typologic and somewhat subtle, that it wasn't just the beginning of the book of Isaiah that's being represented by the Tempest, but rather almost the entire book of Isaiah, which concludes with in Genesis like 50-51, you've got the apocalypse of the Gentiles, and you actually see a world which is desolate, meaning empty, but that is a post-Gentile world, basically, that Isaiah is envisioning. And that world is represented in the Tempest. It's just done subtly, but I show it's very clear once you understand how the symbolism works. and that's sort of the brave new world they're talking about.
Wow, that's incredible. Huh. I appreciate that breakdown.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, it's, if anyone's curious, just read the analysis, and if someone has criticism, I'm happy to respond to it. I do get a lot of pushback on it. People would like to see the Shakespearean literature in a more wholesome light, and they would also like to see a less sort of racial nature to the concept. But my analysis, I will stand with it. I think it's correct, and I think people can read it, and they can just draw their own conclusions.
Yeah. Well, and there seems to be, in my research, there seems to be an intentional effort made throughout the years to portray the Jewish population in a certain light. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with David Icke, for instance.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about the Zionist movement and the effort being made to demonize the Jewish people, and get just people in the world and researchers or just the general opinion to be swayed that all these evil plans are the plans of the Jews, and that it's it's the Jewish people run Hollywood and the Jewish people got this in control, and it's always the Jews are doing things. But actually what his research and some others indicates is that there's an organization that's not linked to any bloodline, or rather bloodlines, but not religions or ethnic groups. It's multinational, it's multiracial group behind that effort to demonize the Jewish people and the Jewish movement. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's fascinating to me that it's been a concerted effort for thousands of years, it seems, going all the way back to the Gospels and maybe before that.
Yeah.
Um, and that I don't really understand too well. I think there's a big piece of history missing that explains kind of the origin of this group and why they target the Jewish people in particular. And maybe you have some insight into that, more insight into that, where
Sure,
that
I
comes
definitely
from.
have strong feelings about it, and have opinions. I would say that first of all, um, the Zionism is actually not a Jewish production.
Yeah,
Political Zionism, the political force that created the Balfour Declaration, um, it comes from Freemasonry.
yeah,
It is a complete Freemason production, and it started in 1840 with Palmerston, Lord Palmerston, who was the Prime Minister of Britain and also the Grand Master of Freemasonry. In that time, the hierarchy of Freemasonry and the political hierarchy in Britain were the same thing, basically. They were all, known as, and it's hard to really understand what the relationship really was based upon, because, it could have just been a political club, whatever. But so Palmerston starts the process in 1840. And it never stops. From that moment on, there is a consistent production of the power of Zionism. I won't go into all the details, but uh, they create the movement, and the legitimate Judaism. You see, this is people will think kind of that this could be seen, my position should be seen as anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, because the expression anti-Semitic is incoherent. But the fact is, I would dispute that, because all of the individuals who create Zionism, political Zionism, are Freemasons. They're not Jews.
yeah,
And at least they're ostensibly, Presbyterian, Church of England. They're all, the royal family of Britain is involved. And for 50 years, they not only set up the conditions by which Israel could exist. You know, they purchased the Suez Canal. They started moving British troops into regions close to, and then eventually the World War One. But so they not only did that, but moreover, they destroyed the legitimate Judaism. So what we call Reform Judaism, which is different now than it was back in 1840, but Reform Judaism specifically rejected Zionism. And some of my most favorite scholars in the world are the Jewish Reform Judaism scholars of the early parts of the 19th century. Abraham Geiger would be the most best known example. And what they did is they took the position that, and this is very coherent regarding this point in history, which is, you know, we have the texts, you know, the Islam and the Gospels and the Jewish historical texts, which are all basically oligarchic war literature, right? If you break them down to what they really are, and they are all racist in a sense. They create racial antagonism. So, following the Enlightenment, the literature should have naturally been transcended. I mean, after the Enlightenment and, you know, kind of the idea of the scientific method and you know, return to the principles of the Socratic method, you'd think that this war literature would have been scrutinized and people would have transcended it. Well, Reform Judaism did exactly that. Geiger was creating texts from which were the original Jewish scripture, but all references to Zionism and racism were taken out.
Hmm.
And so he said that we can look at Judaism as a religion in evolution. It's moving toward a more perfect, you know, understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that we can actually create a worldwide ethical monotheism, a world of moral order without racism and chosen people and you know, and promised lands and things like this. And that the diaspora is actually of the Jews is actually a great benefit to both Jews and the rest of mankind, because we can now present this evolved ethical monotheism to the world all over, because we're an international community. And so his vision of Judaism and Jews was very much logical to being post-Enlightenment, post-Reformation. Um, and this was the 100% enemy of what I call Masonic Zionism. And they destroyed this religion. They absolutely went out, they proselytized against it, they defunded it. And it fought back. There was just a number of times when the rabbis of Reform Judaism opposed Zionism, but when you're up against the British royal family and the British Freemason political control, you don't have much of a chance. And eventually they produced Herzl, Theodor Herzl, so-called father of Zionism. But in fact, the proto-Zionists had been in existence for 50 years preparing everything, and they hired Herzl. Herzl was their employee. He was paid by them. His texts, his speeches were written for him by this group. And he even, well, I won't, you know, it's kind of a long digression, but the fact is that when you get into Ben Gurion and Golda Meir and the next wave of Zionism, you've already had this destruction of Reform Judaism and the establishment of a kind of Judaism which is under the control of Freemasonry. So even though this is, people may find this as far-fetched, these are all assertions that come right out of the historical record. And so when people refer to the criticism of Zionism as anti-Semitic, it's an incoherent position, because Zionism as it exists as a political force in the world today wasn't created by Jews. If you are really proto-Jewish, you would want to be ending this form of Zionism just on the grounds that it wasn't set up by Jews. You know, I mean, Palmerston and and Disraeli and Shakespeare and the Herschel, the Churchill family. I mean, the people who actually set this thing up, all of them are well, they're Anglicans and Church of England, but none of them are Jews. The closest thing to a Jew they had in the whole lot of them over the whole 50-year period was Disraeli, and he had been born to a Jewish family but converted to Christianity. So there's your Jewish lineup. There's not a Jew in it, and they are the ones that actually produced Israel.
Yeah.
So anyway, my work is it's interesting in that it starts out just as an analysis of typology, and ends up with having political implications in the present day. And I mean, I would have never thought it when I was just puzzling around, with the Gospels because I couldn't understand them.
Yeah.
And I don't like literature that seems to have a point and I don't get it. I had, I came from a Catholic family, and we were living in Japan. My father was a chemist. Long story, but we were a non-military family, so I went to a school that was Catholic, and I was trained in the Catechism and the Gospels, and and so even though I fell away from the faith for no particular reason, I wasn't abused by a priest or anything like all the rumors on the internet. I mean, I actually had tremendous respect for my teachers as a young boy. They were inspirational to me. I really liked, the education I was receiving was inspiring to me when I was. But in fact, when I left St. Mary's Military Academy, like fourth grade, that was the zenith of my mental abilities, and have been straight downhill since then. But I had really gotten into the catechism, and so later on. I was able to have the time after selling my businesses to just have kind of intellectual hobbies which I hadn't had before because I was in business and had a family and whatnot, and they were taking all the time. But after selling the businesses, I was able to do a lot of hobbies, and I was really interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was just because I knew a lot about sort of the Jesus movement, but the scroll, the Messianic movement the scrolls described was so different, I mean, it was militaristic, it was xenophobic, very racist, and just the opposite of Jesus's, kind of metrosexual kind of, multiculturalism and pacifism. And I just had this thought. I go, how did these two groups get along in a place as tiny as Judea? They are absolutely diametrically opposed. These are passionate times. They would have clashed violently,
Yes.
And yet they're never mentioned in the Gospels, and the Dead Sea Scrolls never mentions the Christians, even though the material probably predated Christianity. But anyway, so that was kind of I decided I should try to understand that group, the kind of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the people who produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so I read Josephus. He's the only scholar that had any information concerning this, who's on the ground, writing about the events in first century Judea. And so when I was reading him, I just, I could see that there were these kind of parallels to events in the Gospels. And I was very familiar with the Gospels, having, been brought up in that literary tradition as a Catholic. And I thought Josephus was mocking. I thought, this guy's writing like around 90, CE. He knows about Christianity. He's lampooning it. I thought that the parallels were making fun of Christianity, which in fact they are, though not in the way I thought.
Yeah.
But anyway, and so then just one day I was like kind of analyzing all of the different sort of parallels that I was studying. And I realized something truly amazing. I mean, there's only really one insight that I had that's, sort of profound, if you can call it that. I said, all of these parallels that I'm studying, these weird kind of relationships, between the Gospels and the military campaign of Titus Flavius, they're all occurring in the same sequence in both works. And so that was, then I understood the Gospels, and it had predictive value. Like I could then go and since I knew that sequence was the same, I found the three crucified, one survived, taken down from the cross by Joseph of Arimathea. I found that because I knew the sequence. I could look, and it's only a few hundred words of text, and I knew it had to be there, and I read it, and there it was. So
Wow.
I at that point I felt, well, I really understand the work, and I wrote a little pamphlet. I didn't know what to do with it. I just put the analysis. It was like 96, I think, and I put the analysis away. I didn't want to bring it out. I was not a scholar, not an academic. I had no reason. I wasn't interested in financial kind of gain. And I thought, this is just going to hurt a lot of people's feelings. I was interested in the puzzle. I solved it to my satisfaction. I'll put it away. But then I started feeling guilty. I was going, there's a lot of people that could be valuable, that might find it use. I mean, I really should, I could bring it out. And my idea was just to bring it out to scholarship and let them take it, give it to New Testament scholars. So I wrote a pamphlet. I advertised in a biblical archaeologic review. Like 20 people bought this little pamphlet I wrote. And I thought if it's of use to the scholars, they'll just take it on. But one of them, his student had read it. He gave it to Robert Eisenman, who had written James, the brother of Jesus. And Eisenman is the one who really encouraged me to write the book and help me get it published, and gave me a nice blurb for the book. And so I brought it out, and and then it just took on a life of its own. It was a big seller. There was a documentary made, and it's slowly kind of worming its way into New Testament scholarship. Almost everyone is aware of it. Most scholars will attempt. Well, they don't. They would say it's not correct, but they aren't producing reasonable criticism of it. They don't. It's like one guy, Richard Carrier, has taken a real interest in it, and he hates it, and he's often will write negations of it. And so the way that they negate it is kind of amusing. The way Carrier negates it is that he'll take a parallel, and then he will say, look, it's not exactly the same, and there's other ways that the parallel could exist. There's other explanations for the Josephus text or the Gospels text, but he never mentions the fact about sequence. See, sequence is really the critical thing, and you really want. And the basic question for criticism is simply: is there enough parallelism so an alert reader would sense that there was a sequence occurring? You see, you can't really analyze it in isolation. It's not verbatimism. It's parallelism, events that are kind of linked within a sequence.
Yeah.
And I always say, the best way to kind of understand Caesar's Messiah in the Gospels is just to understand the Matthew pre-ministry typology. And with your permission, I'll just run through it. I always do this because it's just so useful for people to know. I mean,
Yeah.
this little tiny system, if you don't understand it, you won't understand either the Gospel, Shakespeare, Aldous Huxley, Kipling. I mean, all this actually is, this little system is actually the basis for a lot of the literature that we don't understand in our world. But so in the Gospels, you have in Matthew 2:13, you've got Joseph has a dream, and he goes from Israel to Egypt, right? Then the Herod was after Jesus, and he massacres the boys, 2:16. And then they return. There's a divine character comes in Matthew 2:20. He says, they are dead who thought the child's life. And you return from Egypt to Israel. Jesus has the baptism. He goes into the wilderness for 40 days, and then he has the temptations, 4:4, he's tempted by bread, Matthew 4:7, the statement, do not tempt God. And then Matthew 4:10, and the statement, worship only God. Okay, well, the author of Matthew has created a tip to stern prefiguration typology for the character of Jesus Christ, because all of the events are all taken from the Old Testament. and you can see it when you look at the sequence in Genesis 50. Joseph has the dreams, and he goes from Israel to Egypt. Exodus 1, Pharaoh massacres the boys. Exodus 4, the divine character comes and he says, all the men who are dead who sought the child's life. Then you go from Egypt back to Israel. And in Exodus 14, you have the baptism of the Israelites, right? He passes through the Red Sea. I'm going to go back to that parallel when I get done with this. But then they go into the wilderness, for 40 years. Notice it's not verbatimism. Jesus goes for 40 days. Moses goes for 40 years, but it's the same place, the wilderness. And then you have the temptations, Exodus 16, you're tempted by bread. Exodus 17, do not tempt God. Exodus 32, worship only God. Now, those passages, those statements in the wilderness are just lifted verbatim and put into Matthew, and then in the same sequence. So you can see that the author of Matthew has done he's showing that Jesus's life was foreseen by the life of Moses. So the first savior of Israel foresees the second savior, the new savior of the new covenant, Jesus Christ. And if you look at particularly the baptism, you can see why sequence is absolutely critical to understand typology, because the Israelites passed through water, but in Matthew, it's not the same location. River Jordan is not the Red Sea, and the Israelites are a whole bunch of people, and they don't really have a baptism. It's hard to understand it. Jesus has his baptism, and it's only because in sequence that the passing through water, is the basis for a typological link. But the author of Matthew, just to make absolutely certain that no one misses the connection, he uses a sentence from from the beginning of the Israelites in the wilderness, so that everyone understands that the baptism is connected between Jesus and the Israelites. He has the sentence, I have called my son out of Egypt. Right? This is a passage in Matthew, and so. Anyway, so that little system of names, locations, and concepts occurring in the same order in both works, that is the whole thing, brother. I mean, if you understand that, then you can look at the Gospels and use the exact same system, and you can understand that the ministry of Jesus is now connected typologically, and you can see that it's all linked into Josephus. So in the pre-ministry of Jesus, you look backwards, and then once he has the adult ministry, it all looks forward. And then there it is. You can understand what the author's point is. He's going to make the same point in terms of Jesus's life, that it prefigures that was made looking backwards, the prefiguration. So it's just the Gospels are tip to stern prefiguration typology. It's all that genre. And just finally here, sorry to be long-winded, but people wonder if Jesus is a historical character. It's not a question that can be answered, because you have the idea with he could be a real character that was embellished. What do you precisely mean by historical character? You're never going to answer it. However, we have the literature, and this we can actually determine as to what it is, and it is prefiguration typology, tip to stern. Once the scholars always known about the typology in the Gospels, and they know that typology is not a historical genre, but they didn't recognize that that going forward, that Jesus was prefiguring typologically some other being, and therefore they thought that a lot of passages could represent history, like he's going to fish for men, at the Sea of Galilee. They thought that was perhaps a historical event. But once you recognize the typology in the Gospels linking to Josephus, then all of the ministry becomes visible as prefiguration typology. And this, we can be certain, is not a fictional genre. The typology is always, it's not a historical genre. This is typology is always fiction. One story is based upon another, so it's not history. It's a genre that's fictional.
Um, Man, there's so many different directions I want to go.
Well, sorry, I
No,
just
no, that's
too
okay.
long
I
of
love
it.
it. I love it. Just real briefly, since you brought up Japan, and I'd heard in previous interviews yours that you lived in Japan. I'm
Yeah,
curious if you're aware of the tomb of Jesus in Japan and the story of Jesus being in Japan.
sure.
That's
Yeah, no,
something.
I've heard about that. I'm really interested. I'm not, in that one. I think is kind of far fetched just because the journey is a long one. But what is sort of kind of interesting are the Joseph Arimathea myths in Britain, which are kind of the same genre of gospel characters moving around, and there, what's really interesting is that the typologic name of the character who takes Christ down from the cross is Joseph Bar Joseph Arimathea,
Yeah,
which I show is just it's a pun, or it's linked to the character Joseph Bar Matthias. But what's fascinating is the character in England isn't called Joseph Arimathea, though he's recognized as the character from the gospel. The name of him is Joseph Bar Matthias.
huh.
So somehow whoever created the legend actually knew about the typology
Hmm.
and used the real name of the character rather than the typologic name Joseph Arimathea.
Yeah,
And there's all these stories about how Joseph Bar Matthias comes to Britain, and it actually links up into the Arthurian, to Arthur legends,
hmm
kind of thing. So there's lots of legends. There's whole books written about, like, for example, Jesus, his time spent in Egypt, because they have, that passage, or that, the father's name is Joseph. But when you understand the typology, you can see that the concept of Jesus in Egypt is actually it's fictional. It comes from the authors using the Old Testament story, and the name of the Jesus's father of Joseph. Again, it's not his history. This is just because they wanted to start linking to the Old Testament, and there was a guy named Joseph who went to from Israel down to Egypt, and so there you get to see a lot of the idea of history starts to dissolve, once you get into the typology.
yeah, yeah. Well, that brings up another line of research that I wanted to mention to you. It sounds like you're familiar with it already. Is there's some people that suggest that the entire history of the Roman involvement in Judea and Israel and all these areas is actually a transposition of their campaigns in England before, and that they wrote the Gospels and they created these stories in Israel so that people wouldn't know what happened in England. Try to whitewash
Yeah,
that history.
yeah, I'm kind of familiar with those things. I don't have any, kind of. It's possible. I mean, once you reduce the Gospels to a kind of fiction,
Yeah,
history's out the window, brother. I
yeah,
mean, you can just now we're kind of lost in a world where we don't really have kind of the links we need to be able to make conclusions, and we really do need to have speculation at this
yeah,
point, because otherwise, um, it's like Fomenko and his timing of history, of European history. I know a lot of people are sort of interested, and I don't know, perhaps you're familiar with it. That we lost 1,000 years, or 1,000 years was made up,
yeah,
and that so I think that can be debunked, oddly enough, by science, in that they can show when the silver was mined,
mm,
and linking it into the Roman silver and to the Carthaginian. They can actually determine that by the Greenland ice sheets,
hmm,
which have that fact, when the silver was produced, because they can see the lead in the atmosphere from the byproduct. So anyway,
interesting.
um, that's that was so Fomenko, but Fomenko's his analysis is kind of what we need. I would say we need more imagination to kind of go back and look at history. The understanding of the gospel, something so important and so much a foundation piece of our history. I mean, if this is just tip to stern fiction, then where are we? I mean,
Yeah.
we have to start kind of reorganizing ourselves, and I also think like even like Zionism needs to have a revision. I mean, there really needs to be an understanding of what happened to the Enlightenment Judaism. Why did the Freemasons destroy it? Why did they say now was the time that we were supposed to go back? I mean, what was really in back of this, for heaven's sake, And it goes into the idea of, well, what is Freemasonry? How was it started? Who do they actually believe they are? There's just so many mysteries.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, to think clearly, you have all of these obstacles because there's so many terms which are inserted into our vernacular because they end thinking that the oligarchs do not want to occur. So you get, conspiracy theorist, anti-Semitism, white supremacist,
Mhm.
truther. There's
Mhm.
one truther. Election denier. One of my favorite ones. I mean, but you can see that there is this habit of creating concepts which end the Socratic method,
Yeah.
right? Because you say, well, I've got these, I have this understanding of Zionism, right? I have it, and here's like I'm trying to show, like these are the facts, and here's my analysis. And instead of the Socratic process going forward, and everyone thinking and trying to criticize and exchange ideas, and make the thinking better, you hit anti-Semitism.
Right.
They go, no, this is I have something wrong in my heart that makes this all of my analysis is, you can't even discuss it. Well, that's just not the human spirit, and we need to overcome the buzzwords and to, it's unfortunately we have so many special interests that are inside of our media and our understanding of history and things that we really need to get past that somehow and move back to just a general understanding of the Socratic method of, we have to, which is why I'm like a First Amendment absolutist,
Mhm.
because I think without the First Amendment, the Socratic method doesn't have the freedom, to be able to, go wherever it needs to go. And so, I try to, I am an advocate of that we really need to open ourselves up to our capacity to reason, and we can't really exclude things just because they're controversial or something. I mean, everything I've ever done, and it's funny because I'm like the most easy to get along with person imaginable, but everything that I've done in terms of like my scholarship and things, it just no matter what I do, it always is a fist fight. I mean, it just goes right into like people are yelling and screaming, and it's just, I'm sorry, here it is, I just take it for whatever you can make out of it. The only thing generally I advocate is just, that we stay in a Socratic method where we really try to, go through facts and reasoning to understand each other. And spiritually, I think this is just critical. I think that religion is, in many ways, is the opposite of the Socratic method, and a real religion would embody it. That we're never more elevated spiritually than when we share and reason. You know what I mean? When
Yeah.
humanity can share and reason, when we can put ego aside and help one another think better, and we all think better. I mean, this to me is the spirituality. So um, so anyway, that's kind of like my little story here. It's just,
Yeah. Thank you for that. I I love that you brought it to spirituality because I got the zodiac behind me here, and it seems
yeah,
blatantly obvious just from a very small amount of research that the story of Jesus, the story of Moses, pretty much every story of any Messiah or any religious story is based fundamentally on the sun going through the zodiac constellations. Um,
yeah, yeah. It's very
and
powerful.
and
Yeah, I
that
mean, in the Gospels, they have a direct, statement concerning Aquarius, where the founding of a new age, where he
Yeah.
says, go find the guy with the picture. Obviously he's talking about the new covenant being a new phase of zodiac progression, yeah. So it's um it's to kind of use our historical understanding of these things in an evolved way. I mean, now um I think we can, just like with Judaism, and Zionism. I think that, as we get more information about the universe, we can improve on this. We shouldn't be stuck kind of with original thoughts that were produced when there was less information. We should just be. I mean, we should be open to criticism,
Mm.
of zodiac analysis and stuff, and try to link all of it into kind of empirical reasoning. So
Yeah. That's what I was going to say is that when I had that realization that whatever may or may not be true about the history of Christianity, that the connections, the parallels, the typology is blatant when you look at it's the film Zeitgeist, which you may or may not be familiar, but it's a
sure,
documentary Zeitgeist
yeah,
that first half an hour where he goes through the various other solar deities before Jesus and how they've all got the same story, basically. The virgin birth and the three stars and dying on the cross and 3 days before resurrection. All these things were already there for thousands of years, and they
yeah.
all link into the story of the Son. So that blew me away, changed my life forever. Just seeing that 30 minutes and led me on this journey. But the point I wanted to make about it is that I was raised Christian too, Methodist Christian, and my family wasn't real pushy about religion. I went to Sunday school until every Sunday until confirmation, and then my mom felt like, okay, I did my job. He's confirmed now. It's up to him if he wants to continue. That was kind of my mom's mentality. But I never really connected with the stories because they didn't make sense to me either. They just seemed so wacky. But once I saw that connection, that liberated my spirituality. And I was able to look at my own connection with God directly instead of feeling like I had to go through a church or some authority figure. And that opened up my life for in many positive ways. And so I think you're right. I know you're right that critical thinking and the Socratic method and the ability to just dispassionately and intellectually examine the facts and not be swayed by emotion and what we want things to be is it's crucial for us to move forward as a species. Uh,
Absolutely. I mean, real religion will produce clear thinking, and that produces you know, a better spirituality and a better kind of emotional structure for our lives. Modern religion, Christian, Judaism, Islam, they're all anti-intellectual because they have codified texts and basically origin stories that are fiction, and they don't use the power of religion to engage the subjects into improvement in thinking.
yeah,
And that's, I think, is like, I would hope and believe, is the transition where we're working on right now, to kind of recover from the Abrahamic traditions, um, and the text, which were, all related to war and supersession and racism. I mean, they're not evolved intellectually. They're just, they represent a period of time when there was, chaos, and they were trying to inspire their, the subjects to, for one thing or another. But anyway, it's we can now go past that, and we can produce spirituality that's beneficial in a much more precise way. And I think we can just kind of unify it all into science, religion, all of this stuff. There shouldn't really be these big distinctions. People just need to, and even politics, all of these things can be, put into, obviously, well, the kind of the way that the people relate to those things, if they're involved in a Socratic kind of, method of communication, right? Are gonna improve. I mean, really, we need to like make the Socratic exchange popular. It has to become a fad. I just like the last election in U.S. It was so dialectic. You hear the two camps describing one another, and they're not engaging directly with reason and facts. Typically, it's just emotion and that's it's the political season, and nothing wrong with the passion, but um you can see how that dialectic is not going to produce a better world, or certainly in a better America. It's just going to, you're going to have all these problems that are not being resolved. We have to try to you know like engage everything into kind of a reason. And we have to, this really is a transition we just have to make, where you don't want to have identity politics or, um, what would example like the Trump side? I mean, you need to have all of those things open for analysis.
Mhm.
You can't just go to emotion and yell and scream at each other. It was, um, yeah, the last election I thought was, an example of a kind of real primitive, mental state of the whole nation. But um, it's also slowly moving forward. So I think the independent media is really useful. I think shows like yours, who people who take the time to try to put their ideas into the public, you know, domain are really valuable. You create so much imagination, so much, you know what I mean? I mean, people, even if they don't agree with you, they can go and see your ideas, and they can start to think about them, and so at one point we only had like 3 or 4, points of kind of where all the information comes from, but now it's just millions of people, and so we're much better off now, and I'm optimistic about the future because of shows like yours and people like you who are really helping just in general, the process accelerate, with new ideas, new thinking, and new criticism, opening ourselves up for self-criticism, for criticism. I think like one really interesting thing to me, a real powerful thing, is the comment section.
Yeah.
Like a podcaster will put out his ideas, he'll interview someone, and then there's comments. Everyone can, and the comments can interact with one another. This is just, to me, that's just wonderful. That's the beginning of a more powerful Socratic, world where you don't just sit and stare at a TV and then accept or reject whatever the idea person is saying. It's engagement.
Yes.
There are no ideas which are not leading to engagement, and everyone has the responsibility to engage. There shouldn't be any passive citizens. Everyone needs to be trying to look to their innate sense of reason and make sense and point out when it doesn't, and accept criticism of their point if they're wrong, or be called upon to justify. I mean, this is how we're going to resolve our propensity to destroy ourselves.
I agree. I feel like I appreciate that. And thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it.
That's not. It's just an observation. I mean, you're really doing great work. I mean, this is really. I mean, this is our moment. We've been stuck with just a few ideas which were contradictory and weighing us down, like the Gospels or the Torah. And now there are people like you who have the confidence, to say, I actually have my own ideas about spirituality. That didn't happen in the Dark Ages.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, or if it did, it was easily suppressed. Whereas
Yeah.
now it's I don't know if it's by design or not, but the internet is has created this opportunity. And
Yeah, it's yin and
obviously,
yang. It's both ways. The oligarchs have it as a power for social control, but the public can use it. The citizen media can use it to uh, activate criticism and thinking. So it's there. Both sides are need to use it. I mean, the oligarchs certainly are using it for social control. They're going to try to control all the algorithms and whatnot. But man, oh man, I mean, I don't know anyone who has kind of gotten into the independent media world who goes back to just
yeah,
wanting to accept, the old ways. So
yeah,
it's mankind is really in a critical struggle right now.
I agree. Uh, the thing about that you mentioned about Aquarius and Jesus talking about, look for the man with the water pitcher and
Mhm.
I'll be with you until the end of the age. That
Yeah, I
comment.
mean, how clear can it be? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's argument about when the age of Aquarius officially begins, and I don't think it really matters. It's not like there's a specific day. It's probably a shift of energy that takes time. But what I see happening, to speak to what you were saying about what we need for people to think critically, I see it happening, like you're saying, in conversations like this that are happening now, you know, probably because of Joe Rogan. Podcasts
Yeah, right. Well,
are
he
popping up
certainly had
everywhere.
an influence, didn't he? I mean, whatever you want to make of him, um, you know,
Yeah, I mean, he's an incredible force.
yeah,
And just him saying to pretty much every person that comes on his show, you should start your own podcast. To this what he says
yeah.
to everybody, and it's a format that allows long conversation format allows for these kinds of ideas to be expounded upon and explored and discussed and opens up the door for a person to be more intellectually curious and ask the questions themselves and then
A
yeah.
better spirituality, a more evolved level of spirituality. The guys who put out the Reform Judaism, Geiger and his crew, they were really the avant garde, in my opinion. If you wonder what can mankind achieve, if people come to become discouraged, there's so much, reversion to violence. Read the works of Geiger. I mean, you can really see here's someone who is, very much in the comes from the Jewish Torah tradition and completely transcends it and has the idea of this ethical monotheism, creating this peaceful world. I mean, it's just inspiring. And that didn't his attempt didn't work and was, the old forces took him down. But that's because they had the money and the political power and media control. But the idea that Geiger's ideas are still in circulation, they aren't going away. And now with the independent media, the idea of a worldwide ethical religion, a Socratic religion, I mean, I just think we got a shot here, brother.
Yeah,
So, you know, yeah.
it, it, I love that the reality is that it doesn't require us to stand up and revolt and fight back like maybe in the past. It's a question of just deciding to do things differently. I
An
always love to use the
information
example.
revolution. Yeah, it's an information revolution. I mean,
Yeah,
I always say, when people say, well, you have to rebel, there has to be violence against the oligarchs. I mean, I always tell people, look, violence will, first of all, it's only going to confuse the public. It's only going to make a very severe dialectic, which you will be having, produce the violence, will be on the defensive. You're not promoting the power of reason that led you to your understanding of the world. This is what you need to promote. The oligarchs will just fall by the boards if we can just get enough people to be thinking clearly. That's all we have to do.
absolutely. And I feel like it's something we'll never see on mainstream television. This movement, it's behind the scenes, it's grassroots, whatever you want to call it. It's
Well, we're going to swallow mainstream media. It
Yeah.
can't. They have to lie about everything.
Yeah.
It's like Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. I mean, he cannot put two words together that are truthful.
Yeah.
I mean, he is so trapped in all of the different lies that the Masonic Zionists produced that everything he says is basically a lie at this point.
Yeah.
Well, that is not a position that can really last. It just won't. It's with the critical citizen media out now. The ideas that are in opposition to his position just become circulated too much, and he's exposed as a liar.
Yeah.
I mean, the situation in Palestine, this tragic situation. Too many people understand it now.
Yeah.
So um, no, I'm telling you, the future is bright, but it's also dark. We don't know which way it's all gonna end up. But we have the responsibility, now to try to really move forward as best we can, to produce, uh, new ideas,
Yeah.
new way, and to promote, reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's a saying that the night is darkest before the dawn.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah, there's the potential for things to get really ugly positive, before a positive reality unfolds. But I always use the example that, if we don't want McDonald's to exist anymore, then we just need to stop going to McDonald's.
Yeah, yeah, no,
We don't
that's
need to
right.
fight. We don't need to protest. We don't need to stand outside McDonald's with signs. Just stop going to McDonald's. And if everyone stops going to McDonald's, McDonald's just goes out of business. There's nothing that needs to be
That's
resisted.
the way to do it. Absolutely. You don't
And
need
it's
to destroy the McDonald's. You just need not to participate in it.
right, right. And I've eaten probably more McDonald's in my life than any other food before I stopped eating McDonald's. And it's not because
Yeah.
I hate McDonald's. I
Yeah,
just
me
decided,
too. I realized I needed to eat organic, at a certain
right,
point,
right.
and now that's all I eat. So
And that's a great metaphor to me for all of the things we're talking about in terms of the mind, the shift
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
mindset.
yeah. No, it is. I hadn't thought of that. It's a great analogy. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. That you transition to eating organic food doesn't mean you have to destroy the farmers or the, glyphosate industry. You just need to start, putting out a raised bed in a fruit orchard and going to farmers markets, promoting people who are creating organic food. I
yeah.
mean, and to my mind, the most important thing we can do spiritually is to become physically healthy.
Hmm.
That even is more important than learning how to think clearly. I mean, there's so much toxicity,
Yeah.
you know, and so the first rebellion is just inside your own body. It's just don't put chemicals in it,
Yeah.
and the health and vitality that will be produced by proper eating and exercise and things. I mean, you're thinking better already, and you're not going to be depressed. I mean, the psychologies are so ruined by the toxicity.
Yeah.
I mean, here where I live, Pat, I mean, 1 in 22 kids are autistic
Yeah.
that are being born. 1 in 22. Well, the oligarchs are just fine with this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the creation of the delta and epsilon class.
Hmm.
See, for the brave new world, I mean, this is just fine. They're not going to stop this.
No, it's by
So,
design, probably.
yeah, yeah, the rebellion is just, don't vaccinate, and with toxic vaccines, and don't put toxic food in your babies, and the to create healthy babies, you've got to create healthy sperm, and right now that isn't happening. 60% of the sperm is gone
Yeah.
from 1950s. We've had this incredible reduction of it, and the 40% that remains is not healthy. I mean, it's just the ones that survive the onslaught. Well, if you're going to have a child, I would say that's the first thing, is to get healthy. Get healthy, and then you'll see you'll have a healthy baby. So,
I appreciate that.
anyway,
Definitely for my journey, it wasn't like a conscious choice. Like, oh, in order for me to become more clear mentally, I need to change my diet and
yeah,
get healthy physically first to just have an opportunity for my body to work effectively and efficiently. That wasn't a goal. It was a separate line of research I was doing about health that led me to start eating healthier. But the result of that opened up my mind to probably different frequencies just like a radio station.
100%. I was absolutely lost because my diet was so bad, and then I married my wife, and she's very strict about food and what she would eat, and so my diet over time changed to hers,
Hmm.
and changed everything. I mean, much more healthy, and I mean, I know this is not very impressive, but I can just say at 75, I have a lot more energy than I did when I was 35. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just, and it's just a fact. So, there it is, just,
Yeah. My
uh,
I love that you mentioned 35 because that's when my journey shifted,
yeah,
and I'll be 50 in a couple of weeks. And pretty much everybody that knows me from back then says that I look younger now
yeah, yeah.
and healthier.
Well, at this point, I don't even care about, like comparisons because everyone that I knew from that era is dead. I mean, just the fact. I mean, no, but I just feel good, and I play singles tennis, and I seem to have enough energy to carry on a bit, and I don't feel any different than I did when I was young. So this is the payoff for eating well. Really, it all
Yeah.
comes to the fact that I married a woman who was really into organic food, and that just changed my life. And it ultimately led to better thinking and whatever I've done, in terms of books and stuff, such as it is. I mean, it's all directly related to that. So, yeah, violence is stupid. It's, I mean, I believe in self-defense. No, don't get me wrong, but as far as a political philosophy, it's always stupid. It never is understood by the public. It's the last thing in the world the independent media needs to be involved with. We just need to go just to, I mean, the two things are think better and eat better.
Yeah.
There you go. I
Yeah.
mean, you do that, and enough people get in the modality, and as I said, the oligarchs will just fall by the board. They only can exist, in fact, with power because they've made us impotent. We don't need to do anything other than just to regain our strength and our mental clarity, and their propaganda won't work any longer.
Yeah.
They rule by propaganda, by creating false histories to control us. Well, when we think clearly, the false histories we can see through them.
I appreciate that. That brings me back to
I have to say, unfortunately, I have to go.
okay.
But I hope I can come back. We can finish this. I know it's not resolved yet, but this being Thanksgiving, I have to start
Understood.
kind of
Understood.
organizing the house because we're having people over here in a bit. So I've got to go. But I want to thank you for the opportunity and can assure you that if you're interested, let's do this again quickly. And I'd love
Absolutely.
to have another discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll figure out a time.
Okay, let's do it, brother.
Thank
All
you
right,
so much for taking the time this
thank you
morning,
so
Joe.
much for
Pleasure.
letting me have the opportunity. We'll talk again.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Bye, Patrick.
Bye bye.